You listen to this podcast for incisive coverage of the tech, business, and market forces shaping clean energy and climate tech. You can get them in your inbox too. Latitude Media's flagship newsletter, The Latitude, offers B2B analysis, commentary, and curated news from across the industry. It's the perfect complement to this show. Subscribe to receive The Latitude daily or weekly in your inbox, or get our AI Energy Nexus newsletter on Wednesdays. Go to latitudemedia.com/newsletter to subscribe today.
Latitude Media, podcast at the frontier of climate technology.
So you get to the point that May 1st has come around and it is time for the moment of truth. I have to imagine this is a pretty tense moment because pouring concrete is something that you very ideally only do once.
You're right. Once a concrete pour starts, you don't stop it. All the pieces have to fit together. So the concrete operation itself didn't look all that different from any other concrete operation.
But it was different. Yanni Tsipis and his team were building the largest net zero office in Boston, and they were getting ready to pour a low-carbon version of concrete, one that had never been used in the entire history of commercial construction.
You had a lot of people standing around watching this section of ground floor slab getting put in place, and I think we all recognized the gravity of that moment. Based on how much planning had gone into the effort and what the product would mean, not just for our project, but for our planet.
It's hard to understate how big of a deal it is for the construction industry to try a new type of concrete. Specifically, they were using a new type of cement, which is the glue that holds the concrete particles together. It's the stuff the Romans used to build the Pantheon.
This is just a totally new way of doing something that's been done for thousands of years. But in a way that's not impactful to the planet. Now, there's something incredibly elegant about that.
For centuries, the makeup of cement stayed more or less the same. It wasn't until 1824, when a bricklayer invented Portland cement, that the recipe changed to what we use today. It's incredibly versatile stuff, but making it requires giant coal furnaces. And production of cement now accounts for almost 8% of global emissions. So there's pressure on the industry to clean up. But with the literal foundations of buildings, bridges, and roads at stake, you can understand why the industry might be slow to change. But Yanni's team wanted to try.
We weren't doing this to place, 20 yards of concrete. We're doing this to show the industry what's possible.
I'm Laura Pierpoint, and this is The Green Blueprint, a show about the architects of the clean energy economy. We've already invented most of the technologies that we need to decarbonize the global economy. But many of these technologies are not yet commercial, and they need to get financed and built at scale. We don't have decades to get them commercialized. We have years. This week, I speak to Yanni Tsipis, Senior Vice President at WS Development, on the first commercial deployment of a low-carbon cement and lessons on finding the right first customer.
If we can embrace the future and if we can create the most interesting, coolest, amazing, forward-looking office building, lab building, retail space, public space, whatever the product is that we're working on, it's a competitive advantage for us.
The tax credit transferability market for clean energy has fueled an estimated $30 billion in market activity in its first year of existence. Crux is the capital markets platform driving much of the momentum in this space. On February 19th, join Crux and Latitude Media for a live virtual event where we'll unpack the top insights from Crux's 2024 Market Intelligence Report and examine the key dynamics at play. This podcast-style conversation will give you the crucial guidance you need to stay ahead of this rapidly evolving landscape. Again, that's February 19th at noon Eastern. Register for free by following the link in the show notes, or go to latitudemedia.com/events.
Yanni is Senior Vice President at the construction company WS Development. He's also from Boston. In his role, he's in charge of redeveloping the city's Seaport District, 33 acres of office, residential, and retail space, plus parks, a whole neighborhood, really.
I grew up in Boston. I went to school here. I've been doing real estate development in Boston my entire career. And so for a kid who grew up in the city to be able to play some tiny little role in helping to shape its future, that's kind of a boyhood dream.
One of the seaport's new buildings is One Boston Wharf Road. It's the city's largest net zero office building, which in this case means that it does have embodied carbon, but it operates with no net emissions. In October 2023, construction was humming along. But around that time, Yanni came across an article in MIT Tech Review about a green cement company called Sublime Systems. It said the company made cement with electricity, not fossil fuels, and it had the potential to be completely zero carbon. So he got Sublime's number. So your next step is you pick up the phone and you call Sublime. So how did that first conversation go?
I don't think we knew what to expect from that conversation. I know they had no idea what to expect from that conversation because it's very unusual that a supplier to a supplier to a subcontractor to a general contractor gets a phone call from an owner, from a real estate developer.
From the perspective of a first-of-a-kind climate tech company like Sublime, it's not just unusual, it's actually incredibly awesome to get interest from the end user of a complex multiple-step supply chain. This is true in commodities like steel and e-fuels because an influential end customer can push the rest of the chain to take a chance on a low-carbon product. It's definitely true here in cement.
The company that produces the cement is way down on the supply chain and definitely is not used to hearing from real estate developers and owners, kind of the ultimate client at the proverbial top of the food chain. And so it was just a fascinating conversation. I think they were a little bit taken aback, didn't really know how to react or what to say at first. But I think eventually we got to know each other a little bit and we kind of explained some of our philosophy and why we were so interested.
WS Development didn't know what they would use the cement for yet, but they knew they wanted in. What's in it for you on all of this? Did this come down to real excitement and commitment around greenhouse gas reduction? Is it worth the cost to you to be able to show the world that you're doing something no one else has done yet? Like what was the thing at the end of the day within WS Development that was like the reason everyone said yes?
We thought this was just super cool. And it's
I love that answer.
I mean, our ability to say it's cool and then just go do it is also a function of who we are as a company and how we're set up in our decision-making process. And lots of organizations don't necessarily have the ability to just say, wow, that's amazing, and try something. And certainly that goes for public and government customers, but it also is true in lots of parts of the private development industry as well. It's also worth pointing out that for us, we're in a very competitive business. And our customers, retail tenants, restaurateurs, tech companies, life science companies, they aspire to be in the best buildings, the best neighborhoods, the kind of physical places that will help them attract and retain the best talent, be most relevant to their customers or their constituents.
The problem was Yanni's team was actually close to finishing construction of One Boston Wharf Road, but they were so intrigued by Sublime's low-carbon cement technology, they figured there might be a few remaining places to use it. But their window of opportunity was closing.
It was an extremely tight timeline. And in fact, this project, this multi-$100 million project, was a moving train. And Sublime either had to get on the train at the right, not even station, because the train was moving, had to sort of jump on the train along the way, or the train would have kept moving.
But before they could pour any concrete, Sublime, WS, and its contractors had to deal with a series of hurdles. They had to think through the economics, find the right placements for the concrete, and secure enough cement in time to meet construction deadlines. But first, they had to secure buy-in from WS's internal team and the long list of contractors and subcontractors they worked with. As you're having these initial conversations to figure out, basically, can you work together? What is happening inside WS Development? Like, how are you convincing your team to do this? Because obviously you've got this ethos of experimentation. So does that mean you sort of mentioned this in a meeting and everyone's like, yes, let's go do this? Or was it more complicated than that to get everyone bought in?
Nobody really knew what to expect at first. This was something completely new. And although we like to think of ourselves as a company and our Seaport team as at the forefront of innovation in the built environment, the reality is the design and construction industry generally, especially in the United States, tends to be pretty reluctant to try new things and to try new materials and products. So I would say there was a healthy skepticism among the team when this idea was first raised. It was not something that had ever been used in commercial construction before. Now, re-enter at that point Sublime. They recognized that reluctance. They recognized kind of the ethos and culture of the design and construction industry, and they recognized early on that in order to gain traction and ultimately be adopted by that industry, they had to do a tremendous amount of legwork in terms of testing and demonstrating that the product could meet the appropriate standards to satisfy both the designers who were going to have to specify the product and be comfortable that the product would perform, and construction partners who were going to have to actually work with the product and put it in place in the field. And so what we found is that the Sublime team had already done a really, really robust array of tests, both in the laboratory and in the field, that they had already been socializing the product with the folks who would be their initial customers, so the ready-mix concrete suppliers. And so they had already laid a foundation. They had already kind of developed a toolkit that really helped us very quickly build consensus, well, first confidence and then consensus around the application or the possibility of application of this product.
They also had a unique partnership with Boston Sand and Gravel, right? So can you say a bit about how important that partnership was? Had you worked with Boston Sand and Gravel before? What did Sublime and Boston Sand and Gravel do together that kind of helped give you confidence?
Yeah, great question. Boston Sand and Gravel is probably the largest ready-mix concrete provider in Boston. They've provided most of the concrete for our Boston Seaport project over the years. They're a great partner. But we as WS almost never intersected with Boston Sand and Gravel as an organization because they were a supplier to a subcontractor to our general contractor. And so we're several rungs of the supply chain removed. And frankly, the first time any of us had ever actually met the whole team from Boston Sand and Gravel was in the context of the Sublime adventure, which I think is kind of interesting and illustrative in and of itself. But Boston Sand and Gravel is, simply put, is Sublime's customer. Sublime sells their product to Boston Sand and Gravel, which at a batch plant near North Station, Boston, mixes the cement product, which is the catalytic component of ready-mix concrete, with the aggregate, with the admixtures, with the water, in order to create the kind of ready-mix concrete that comes off the cement, the concrete truck in the field. And Sublime, again, very presciently, had been working for several years with Boston Sand and Gravel to better understand the ready-mix concrete business, the risks that Boston Sand and Gravel, as their primary customer, would be concerned with, some of the technical aspects that they had to be concerned with. And so again, when we made this decision that this was something we wanted to do, that foundation had already been laid. So we weren't starting from scratch.
Okay, so you're working with Sublime, you're talking to them about what they can potentially provide to you. There's got to be some cost associated with what it is they're ultimately going to be providing around green cement. So tell me about kind of your initial discussions around that. How did you think about the price premium associated with green cement that you'd be employing in One Boston Wharf?
Sure. I mean, the reality in this case is that the quantities that we were talking about, the building was already under construction, the foundations were already in place, a bunch of the slabs had already been poured. So the quantities that we were talking about here were small enough such that whatever the premium was for, the product at the time that we used it, and of course it's important to point out that the moment in time or the moment in the Sublime trajectory where we use this product, it really was still sort of handmade in their pilot plant in Somerville. And so it's a pre-scale cost structure. But the reality is that the relatively small amount of product that we were using, it was such an infinitesimally small premium to be paid that it was not at all part of the discussion.
Well, and I think it's true generally, right, that when you're thinking about the total cost of construction within a building, a green premium on a different kind of cement, particularly in the future as these costs comes down, is not necessarily something that's going to break the bank on these projects. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, the reality is that the premium that we pay for sustainability in terms of this building being all electric, in terms of the quality of the systems and the nature of the systems that we're already building into the building, makes the cost of the cement, even if it were the entire building, pale in comparison. So the industry has already adjusted to a degree and embraced the notion of paying some degree of premium for sustainability. And through the lens of, a 700,000 square foot building, some modest premium for green cement or green other types of products. It's not unique to cement. I would say the industry in general has already kind of adjusted to that reality and embraced that reality.
I love that. Well, and I really, I think this is a trend that hopefully we'll see really accelerate in the coming years, because I think, we're seeing this too in, for example, the carbon dioxide removal markets, where there's a number of companies, particularly around Frontier, that are willing to pay upwards of $5,000 a ton for CO2. And so recognizing the benefits of going first, of being innovative, of demonstrating what your company can do in all of this, and the relative low costs, even at those, really high initial prices, of ultimately incorporating these kinds of products into your systems. I think hopefully we'll see a lot more of that happening.
Our adoption of this product, in our minds, hopefully will help accelerate its scaling up. And as a result, the faster it scales up, the faster the cost structure comes into line with what the industry is used to on a much larger scale basis.
Okay, so let's go back to the project itself and talk for a second about the timeline, because this is also a little bit of kind of like a crazy moment for you. You're under construction at One Boston Wharf, and now you're talking to a startup that, as you say, has a small pilot production facility, but not exactly the ability to fulfill large cement orders on a rapid basis. So talk a little bit about kind of the timing of what you needed for the project and where Sublime was in that moment and their ability to service contracts.
Sure. One of the most complicated parts of the Sublime discussion, once we were past sort of the basic engineering diligence, was this question of, well, how do we use this product in an impactful way? And frankly, based on where we were in the project's construction at that time, how much product can Sublime produce in their pilot plant in time for it to be used? And so we iterated a bunch with our design team and their production team, their operations team, and were able to come up with 2 places where they could provide enough product for it to be used in a meaningful, impactful way. And then sort of the two lines crossed, one in May of 2024, one in July of 2024. The project itself was actually completed in September of 2024, so this was right at the tail end of the overall construction project. And so we made a decision to put Sublime right at the front door of the building, so that everybody who walks into and out of One Boston Wharf Road through the beautiful public space that exists at the ground floor of that building will be stepping on Sublime cement. The second installation is in a public sidewalk right outside the building. So we have a 1/3 mile long linear park designed by James Corner Field Operations, the same landscape firm that did the High Line in New York. Ours is called Harbor Way. And so if you're walking on Harbor Way and you cross Congress Street, you will step on a sidewalk made of Sublime cement.
Okay, so tell us about the moment that you decided to press go as a company. How exciting did that feel? What was it like? Or was there even a single moment?
No, there was definitely a moment when all the stars aligned. The data was good. The design and construction team had signed off. We identified the location. Sublime had confirmed that they'd be able to deliver the product. And this was a relatively short time before we actually were making the installation, just because they were the ones who were on the hot seat to produce enough product in a timely manner for us. And so it came together a couple weeks before the placement. And I think we all sort of just looked around the room at one of our weekly job meetings and said, okay, we're going to give this a shot. We're going to try it out. It's going to be really neat. And we had our first placement at the beginning of May 2024. By that point, everybody was lined up. We had the plan in place. We knew where it was going to be. We had the logistics plan done in terms of where the trucks were going to come in, how the concrete product was going to get to the place where it would ultimately lie. All the legwork had been done, and we were all just sort of holding our breath, waiting to see how this was all going to go.
We'll hear how it all went down after the break.
Hey there, I'm Brad Langley, and I'm the host of With Great Power. If, like me, you enjoy the green blueprint stories about scaling the clean economy, then I think you'll like With Great Power. With Great Power is a podcast for and about the people building the future grid today. Each episode takes you behind the scenes with the innovators, engineers, and visionaries transforming our electric grid. From the complexities of managing distributed energy to the evolution of utility business models, you'll hear from insiders across the industry who are dedicated to reshaping the power system. So listen to With Great Power on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And never miss an episode by subscribing for updates at gridx.com/podcast.
So Yanni's team had done their due diligence on Sublime. They'd secured the buy-in from contractors up and down the supply chain. They'd picked their two places to use the cement, and Sublime had sprinted to produce enough cement to deliver in time to meet the construction deadline. They were getting close to their first concrete pour, the moment you heard at the top of the show, but there was still a lot that could go wrong. I'm curious to know if you're at all like me. I love to catastrophize. Did you have moments where you were sitting there thinking through everything that could go wrong and what this might look like if it does?
Absolutely.
What are some of the things that could go wrong here?
Sure. I mean, look, if you're going to innovate, you have to be ready to fail. I mean, that's sort of foundational to the culture. And in the very worst case scenario, we place this stuff and then a month later it starts to crack or it goes to pieces or it, turns purple or something. And we have to chip it out and replace it with normal ready-mix concrete. And in this instance, we're not talking about an entire portion of a building. We're not talking about an entire floor of a building. We're talking about a very prominent but, somewhat a small area of the building. If that was the worst that happened, we're fine with that. And that was definitely a scenario that we discussed, and it was a choice that we made. And we were certainly prepared to bear the consequences if the product failed. But we also had a very high degree of confidence because of all the testing that had been done that the product was not going to fail.
Okay, so you get to the point that May 1st has come around and it is time for the moment of truth. How did it go?
The good news is the Sublime product worked and handled just like normal ready-mix concrete did, except that you had a lot of people standing around watching and taking videos and documenting and smiling and, really enjoying watching this section of ground floor slab getting put in place. And I think we all recognize the gravity of that moment, based on how much planning had gone into the effort and what the product would mean, not just for our project, but for our planet.
And so you mentioned before that standard practice is you take samples, right, of this particular concrete pour, and then you're going to be testing them. So what was it like to hold your breath over the period of time that you were doing those tests?
Yeah, great question. We took a bunch of samples and then held our breath to see, really it's the 7-day break. That's the first indication of whether the stuff is working or not. And, lo and behold, the 7-day breaks all came out great. And then over time, what we found is that the product was performing extremely well. And in fact, the strength curve kind of kept going. And that gave us a whole lot of confidence in how this product is going to perform long term as well.
Okay, so your confidence is going up and up. And now you're approaching a second concrete pour date. And you hit a bit of a snag in the form of one of this podcast's favorite bugaboos, which is the weather. So can you tell us a bit about what happened in July?
Sure. So the sidewalk pour was an outdoor pour. And it was a very, very hot day. And just by way of background, when concrete cures, it's an exothermic reaction that generates a lot of heat. And you really don't want to have concrete get too hot as it cures because it'll crack, it'll fail, it'll spall, and you have to chip it out and start over. So we're pretty good in the industry at figuring out how to deal with hot weather placements of normal ready-mix concrete. We add ice to the mix. There are other admixtures that we can add to the mix to keep the concrete temperature down and the exothermic reaction under control. We really didn't know what to expect with the Sublime product. We didn't know whether it was going to respond the same way. And so we sort of stood around that morning and said, okay, it's going to be really hot. What should we do? Is there anything different we should try? And the Sublime team suggested that we just treat it like any other ready-mix concrete, in a hot weather pour, which is exactly what we did. Nobody knew how it was going to work. Nobody knew how workable the concrete was going to be, whether it would set up too fast, too slow, whether it would crack very quickly. But we treated it just like normal ready-mix concrete on a hot day, and everything worked out great.
Whew. And when will you know that the placement has been fully successful? I know that one of the things you're tracking right now is the freeze-thaw cycle, which we're so familiar with in Boston.
So the interior placement is certainly performing very well. The outside placement on the sidewalk, we are going to watch very closely over time. Concrete in Boston and sidewalks is subject to a freeze-thaw cycle year after year. It's subject to corrosive agents like salt and other de-icing agents year after year. And, the industry has figured out how to make very durable sidewalks. There are plenty of 30, 40, 50-year-old sidewalks all over the city of Boston that are performing great. We're definitely going to watch the Sublime pour carefully over time to understand how it performs. So far, so good. We're halfway through the winter, and it's been more focused on freeze than thaw. But it's something we're going to learn from over time.
I love this. So what do you think this has meant to Sublime as a company? I would imagine that they've got folks coming through all the time to check out the real installed version of their cement.
Yeah, our hope is that this helps them a lot, and as a result, helps the product gain more traction across our industry, not just in Boston, but locally, nationally, globally, of course. And so that's a big part of the reason that we did this was to help the company and the product proliferate. And yeah, it's been great over the past few months. Sublime has had a number of prospective customers, a couple of prospective investors, through the project and to meet with us and interview us about our experience. And that's every bit as much part of our commitment and aspiration as putting the product in place in the first place.
What are some of the lessons for other building owners and real estate developers who want to be as innovative as you are? What can you tell us about the decision-making process, the number of decision makers, the ways in which you've infused this culture of innovation and experimentation? What are some of the things that other companies could do to start to run in these directions?
No, it's an excellent question. There are a couple of different topics here. Number one is just the nature of the organization and the culture of the organization. There are lots of businesses, real estate development being one of them, where innovation and trying new things is dangerous in the sense that, whether you're building single-family homes or retail centers or office buildings, very often around the country, around the world, there's a bit of a formula. And there's a sense of, well, look, if we build it this way, we know it's going to work because that's what the market has always told us. And there's nothing wrong with that per se. But very often there are organizations that come along that say, well, that's great. That's the typical prototype. That's how it's been done, for a long time, and that's proven. But maybe we can do better by trying something new, by innovating. And this isn't to say that that's, better than, a more traditional approach. It's just different. It's a different business model. But certainly having an organizational culture that treats innovation and entrepreneurship in a way that's celebrated and embraced is really important. Because inevitably, whether this is coming from the most junior assistant project manager, or someone like me that oversees, a big project, or the CEO of a company, one has to have a comfort zone bringing forward a new idea like this. Someone has to feel safe saying to his or her peers, managers, mentors, investors, hey, let's try something different. This has never been done before, but we think it could be really cool. And that's just an organizational culture sort of principle. And some organizations value that, some organizations don't. And again, it's not right or wrong. But for entrepreneurs in this space and in building systems and building materials and climate tech, finding those organizations that have a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship and celebrating the bringing forward of new ideas and the trying of new things, those are the kinds of marriages that are going to work best. And the Sublime example is a terrific illustration of that.
How important do you think it is that WS Development is private, locally owned, family owned? Do you think this is possible in the context of a big public company?
It's certainly possible anywhere, but it definitely helps a lot that we're a relatively small company, we're privately owned. It's a very flat organization. The decision-making process here is very integrated, very engaged across different levels of the organization. And so it's very easy for us to be entrepreneurial and to be nimble and to try new things without having to check with, somebody across the country or around the world or, the public markets. For example, we have a lot of ability to be entrepreneurial just because of the way we're set up. But that doesn't give us a monopoly on innovation or entrepreneurship. It just makes it a little bit easier for us to be nimble and flexible and try new things like this.
Yeah, I love that. Well, so talk a little bit about what Sublime did right and what kind of lessons there are for other companies that are like Sublime in their scaling journeys and are looking to partner with big companies, get real demonstrations under their belts. Are there certain things that really stand out to you as really critical to the story that Sublime did that could illustrate what to do for other companies?
Sublime did a lot of things right. First of all, they started with a really incredible idea and technology. Like, let's be clear about this. They have discovered something really extraordinary. And so that was the first thing they did right. But what they did with that, and I think this speaks to the sort of the humility of that organization and the humble nature of the concrete industry, is they understood very clearly where they stood in the supply chain and what the risks and barriers would be to the adoption of their product by what they, I think, assumed would be their customer, which is the ready-mix concrete industry. Very risk-averse, very set in their ways, not a great history of innovation or entrepreneurship or trying new things, for valid reasons. And so they set about very early on taking this incredible new product, this incredible new idea they had developed, and coming up with the data and the technical foundations that would be necessary to convince their very conservative, very set in their ways primary customers that this product was something worth looking at and worth buying and was not unacceptably risky.
So Yanni, let's talk a little bit about the trajectory here for Sublime. You're talking about world-scale revolution in ultimately decarbonizing cement production. What is it going to take to get there? And what do you think this project is going to mean for Sublime and for zero-carbon cement in that picture?
Sure. Well, our hope is that this demonstration project illustrates to the construction and development industries the power of the possible. We hope it helps illustrate the availability of Sublime's product. We hope it helps illustrate the impact that their product can have on our planet. And ultimately, we hope it helps Sublime accelerate their trajectory and attract more folks in our business to be saying to their teams, hey, we want to try this, not just on a demonstration project basis, but on a project-wide basis, and have it become rapidly adopted across the entire construction and development industry. And as I mentioned earlier, a big part of that responsibility rests with Sublime, which now has under construction their first scale-up facility in Holyoke, Massachusetts, that will, be able to produce tens of thousands of tons a year, not dozens of tons a year, the way their pilot plant does currently. And ultimately, it's that prototype of larger plant that can be replicated into megaton-type facilities, the way we have very large cement manufacturing facilities around the globe today, and help to really accelerate the trajectory of the production capacity. And that's ultimately what will help make the product more available, lower the unit cost so it competes head-to-head directly with normal Portland cement, and help get this stuff into every construction project around the world.
Yanni Tsipis is the Senior Vice President for WS Development Seaport and Fenway Developments. The Green Blueprint is produced by Latitude Media in partnership with Trellis Climate. The show is hosted by me, Laura Pierpoint. Our producers are Aaron Hardick and Daniel Woldorf. Ann Bailey is our senior editor. Sean Marquand is our technical director. Stephen Lacey is our executive editor. If you'd like to suggest topics or guests for the show, send an email to editors@latitudemedia.com. You can listen to The Green Blueprint at latitudemedia.com or subscribe wherever you get podcasts. And if you have a fellow clean energy or climate tech traveler who would benefit from the insights in this show, send them a link. This is The Green Blueprint, a show about the architects of the clean energy economy.